So, we really need to dive deeper into this idea of mental health. The self help industry and the secular world are speaking to mental health as a prognosis, a diagnosis, an element of things that are outside of God. And that's simply not true. There is a spiritual battle that is happening every single day for our minds. This between our 2 ears is the biggest battlefield, and we are fighting against not flesh and blood, but the principalities of darkness, essentially the father of lies. And what I think is truly the root of this entire pandemic, epidemic, whatever you want to call it, not COVID-19, but the other things, is the essence of the enemy. It's the essence that we have come into communion with the father of lies, and therefore our mental battles on a consistent basis are truly something we are holding tight to. And so I want to break that bondage for you today. And I also want you to get into the word, because all of the gospels, you hear and see Jesus take action over the mental health crisis that was happening in that time and is still happening today. So the first example I want to give you is inside of Matthew 9. And I like to look behind the stories and behind what's actually happening into the context of how it could be. Imagine the woman who is the one who has been bleeding for 12 years. Imagine mentally, put yourself in that place, the anguish, the despair, being outcast from her entire community, feeling lost, feeling completely abandoned and rejected. I have felt that way through my own life, maybe from decisions I've made myself or decisions that have happened to me, or even culturally things that are going on. That is probably how the mass majority of the world felt during 2020 when we were in this state of isolation. But I want you all to look deeper, right? Because it's not just this conversation of anguish, it's more than that. She doesn't have a family. Will she ever be married? It's a conversation of unworthiness. It's a conversation of lacking beauty. It's so much despair. It's so much personal rejection even. If she had a mirror that she was standing in front of, I know you women and men, you guys both do this every single day. We come into communion with the lies of the enemy and we call ourselves unbeautiful. We call ourselves ugly. We call ourselves fat. We call ourselves grotesque. We call ourselves all of these names that if you wrote down in a list the things that you say to yourself every single day, and you decide to say them to your neighbor, perhaps even say them to a stranger, the depth of despair, back to anguish, what you would feel as you said this, looking into the eyes of a brother or a sister, the things that you're willing to accept every single day, it is manipulative. It is untrue. It is not partnering with what the word says about you. You are called, you are set apart, you are capable, you are worthy. I believe this is why the Bible tells us so many times to be strong and courageous, not just for the actions we're going to take, but for the battle that we're going to make every single day. So this woman, she's in this place of being outcast, and she decides to turn the tables on the enemy and say, you know what? I believe there is something more. And I have heard that there is truth happening on the interior of these city walls. And I am going to go anyway. I am going to go in spite of my fear. I'm going to go in spite of what others will say. I can only imagine the verbal abuse as she secretly tried to walk into the city, right in the place that she wasn't allowed to be because of her issue with blood. The unclean is how she was perceived. And yet she knew in her heart that there was more for her life. And I believe the despair of the mental health crisis that we're having is because there is this chasm between understanding and truth and what they have partnered with in vulnerability and loss. And so she has this mustard seed of faith, this mustard seed of hope that I believe if you can capture today, you can change your mental health battle, as did she, because one touch of the hem of his garment changed the trajectory of her life. It changed the trajectory of all of the on-standers, the bystanders, the people who were onlooking over her situation. And that's where the power of testimony, by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony, we will be freed and we will show up in a place of unbonded territory. We will no longer be slaves to the spiritual principalities of darkness that are taking bondage right now. This is where we could go into a whole conversation about demonic oppression and possession and what that's looking like in children of God. But there is hope. Okay, there is hope. And I know that mental health doesn't necessarily mean that you're dealing with something physical, as was the woman with the issue of blood. But think about the deaf. Think about the blind. Think about the mute. You might not have that ailment, and you might not believe that it's connected to an enemy tactic. It might be something that you were born into, or someone you know and love and care for was born into. My intention here is not to discredit those truths, but that it's to reveal there is opportunity for holistic living. And I think a lot of times there is a mental blockage of our ears, our eyes, and our mouth. If you've ever felt silenced, if you've ever felt like someone was masking you or putting your hand over your mouth, that you were unable to speak life or truth or even just your own feelings about a situation, I believe that you have a spirit of mute inside of you, and that can be outcast, that can be removed. What about hearing? Maybe you have been lost and there is no understanding of how to hear from God. There is access to do that by healing yourself from the element of being deaf. God's children are on the rise, and we are being awoken every single day. The scales are being removed, and people are being strong and courageous over what God has called them into. As the disciples were sent out 2 by 2 later in Matthew, the Lord tells them to go, and he tells them to not be weary. The mental health element, the crisis that has taken the world over, the depression, the anxiety, all of it is connected to the fact that we are in a hurry and we are going too supersonic fast. Even in a state of depression, our minds are swirling, and therefore we have no sense of truth connected to what God says. Come to me, all ye who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Remember, friends, today, one touch, one mustard seed of faith. Pursue Jesus and find out the healing that's on the other side. He cares about your mental health state. Of course, there are therapists that can support in this as well. Highly recommend them to be a Christian therapist so that they are aligned to the truth, and the truth that covers all elements of darkness and covers and casts out the lies of the enemy.